This next example is one of the only recordings of Brahms, old recordings of Brahms, and really in existence from the very early 20th century. And it's the Greta Evalle Quartet playing the second movement of Brahms' string quartet, opus 67. And you'll hear, this is quite a slow movement, but you'll hear a few bars in a very prominent accelerando, which you generally would never hear in modern performance today.
Well, that drunkenness you'll hear a bit more of in the next section, and we're almost at the end of our talk, so bear with us. In Brahms' era, rhythmic alteration of notes was also a prominent feature of performance. Contrary to modern conventions, notes, often melody notes, but not always, not only melody notes, sometimes the accompaniment, were lengthened or shortened to give heightened expression. Often this led to asynchrony or a break between the melody and accompaniment in the style that has come to be known as the bel canto type of tempo rubato, where the left hand goes on in time and the right hand is freer. But other types of rhythmic alteration were also very prominent. Sometimes these were the subtle bendings of rhythms in a style similar to what I mentioned before, the notes in égale or inequality, where you have this kind of tripletizing effect. Sometimes there were transformations of the original equal-valued rhythms, something that was written in equal values, to dotted rhythms or over-dotted rhythms or tripletized rhythms. Sometimes the opposite effect happened. Dotted rhythms were transformed into equal-valued notes, so there was a kind of ironing out of the rhythm. Triplet quavers were sometimes executed as a quaver, two semiquavers, and vice versa. You could get this sort of change from what was written on the page. Or a quintuplet of quavers as two semiquavers, one quaver, and two semiquavers. Excuse that I'm using quavers and semiquavers, that's what I'm used to. These types of alterations were well documented in written pedagogical texts throughout the 19th century. You might be interested sometime to look at Manuel Garcia, who in the mid-19th century and beyond produced various methods on singing, and in those he's very detailed about the types of alterations that a singer would make to be expressive. These types of alterations were also used in piano playing, so you could actually gain something, pianists here would gain something from reading Manuel Garcia. Significantly, it's evident that some composers, finding it impossible to notate the subtleties of rhythmic alteration, resorted instead to writing expressions such as rubato or espressivo. You find that very much in the music of Chopin, but also in Brahms. Obviously, they wanted something to happen at these points, but it was impossible to write down what that should be. And often it was written that unless you actually heard that particular composer playing, you really wouldn't know how to emulate it. So there's a significant problem here for understanding how these things sound in actual fact. Also significant is the underlying meaning of certain signs. I mentioned this earlier. For example, according to Fanny Davies, who we've heard ear-witnessed Brahms and Joachim and Haussmann playing, she says, quote, the hairpin sign, so the crescendo diminuendo, as used by Brahms, often occurs when he wishes to express great sincerity and warmth, applied not only to tone but to rhythm also. He would linger not on one note alone, but on a whole idea, as if unable to tear himself away from its beauty. I just love that line. He would prefer to lengthen the bar or a phrase rather than spoil it by making up the time into a metronomic bar. In our performance tonight, we're going to interpret such markings in this way, and we're really, I stress, experimenting. Every time we come to play them, we think, have we done the right thing? Are we, we're in an experimental stage, so it could come out differently than how we've rehearsed in a way. Sometimes our individual alterations may cause asynchrony between the five of us, giving a sort of improvised, spontaneous feeling to the interpretations. But in fact, this is the style of playing that you hear on early recordings and that you've actually ear-witnessed tonight. I'd like to play you two recordings of a fabulous pianist who actually went to Vienna when she was 16 and actually met Brahms reportedly every week for a whole year on a Wednesday at lunchtime. Sometimes they simply had lunch, but often she played his music to him and he gave her coaching and commented on the right style, etc. Her name was Atalka Freund. She was a Hungarian pianist who was born in 1879 and lived into her 90s, died in Washington in 1977. Brahms absolutely adored her playing and very unusually made her a member of the Tonkunstlerverein in Vienna at a very early age. It was unheard of before, but that was the sort of esteem in which he held her. She was a great friend of Bartók. She actually premiered some of his works, and he would often take his new compositions to her to play before he sent them off to the publisher. And she ended up studying with Busoni, and just to give you an idea of her stature, Busoni in 1901 conducted her first Berlin debut with the Berlin Philharmonic, where she played 3 piano concertos in one concert. I mean, unheard of. Beethoven 3, Brahms 1, and the Liszt Spanish Rhapsody. I mean, just phenomenal. Anyway, she stopped playing around 1910 to bring up 2 sons, and then of course the war happened and the family moved to Washington finally in the early 1940s, and she wanted to resume her concert career, and she obviously had kept up the practice because the recordings, her concerts got fabulous reviews. You can read them in the Washington Post, but no concert promoter really wanted to take her on, and concert agents because of her age. And luckily in the 1950s she happened to record 2 discs worth of music by Brahms, Bach, Scarlatti, and Busoni, and also Bartók. So this is a fantastic resource for us, I think, and I'm going to give a paper at this conference in 2 days' time about her. I listened with great interest when I first got hold of this Pearl recording CD to her performance of the slow movement from Brahms' Opus 5 Sonata. I just feel her playing here must be something akin to what Brahms would have done himself or expected. She plays with, of course, dislocation, lilting rhythms. She tripletizes everything, and in the second part, where the quartato marks are given, she makes all sorts of rhythmic changes in order to bring out the special quality of this section.
Sorry. This is
demonstrates the sort of tempo modification that she used, and also these single agogic lengthenings on particular notes. And I imagine that this is the style that she probably learned from listening to Brahms and from his coaching. the current style then was a very, very synchronized, very in-tempo, very literal interpretation of the score.
So finally, in our preparation for today's performance, we've really tried to embody this style in the hope that it may give Brahms' F minor piano quintet a chance to be heard in a different light. We're not claiming, of course, that this is exactly how Brahms envisaged it, but from somewhere within the sound world to which Brahms was intimately accustomed, we've also tried to heed the advice he offered to the conductor Otto Dessau, when Dessau asked Brahms about the tempos in the Second Symphony. Brahms' reply to Dessau's letter came in the form of a famous quote from Goethe's Faust. "Unless you feel it, vain will be your chase. Unless it pour forth from the soul, and with powerful primeval joy compel the hearts of all who hearken." So now, in the spirit of experimentation, we invite you to listen with an open mind to our interpretation of Brahms' F minor piano quintet.